Thank you for tuning in to Upon the Rock broadcast. I'm your host, Pastor Lawrence Shakir. I believe the Word of God will build a godly foundation in the lives of people. There is more available information on our website. You can log on to shakirministries.org. Now, let's go into today's message.
God wants us to stay in the Word and wants us to be led by the Spirit on what to say and what not to say. So when I was talking about earlier that if you go through something with a friend or a family member and there's this animosity here, you can't always voice your opinion just because you think you're right. There is a certain time and there's a certain season to say it. And that's what brings me to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He says, to everything there is a season. Seasons come and go. We have summer, spring, winter, fall, and in the spiritual realm we have due season. But he says, in everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. How many know there's a purpose for everything that's under the sun? But he says there's, for every time, for everything, there is a season. Even in a disagreement that you have with somebody else, there's a season for you to address the situation. And there's also a season for you not to address it. He said there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. He says there's a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. So in other words, and I like what it says right here about a time to plant. Sometimes you can address the situation not head on, but just sowing a seed. In other words, there's a time to kind of just put a little bit of influence in there and leave it alone. There's a time to really just plant this little thought and just kind of just leave it at that. If you're having contention between you and somebody that you love and you really just can't, for lack of better words, get away from them, but you have to kind of be with them or dwell with them or work with them, there's a time to plant a seed in their mind to kind of just stop the animosity. Then there's a time, he said, to pluck up what was planted. There's a time to take back things. In other words, if you planted something evil or if you planted something that was not good, there's a time to kind of go in and take that back. I'm sorry, I apologize. Forgive me for this that I've said or I've done a year ago or a month ago or last week. There's a time to pluck it up, the very thing that was planted. Are you all hearing me? Because sometimes we're trying to fix something and we haven't uprooted some of the negative attitudes and the negative circumstances that has caused this harvest to be there in the first place. So that's what I love when he says a time to plant, but there's also a time to pluck up what was planted. And some of us, we need to go back and pluck up some of the things that we have planted. Okay? God will give you wisdom on what you need to pluck up. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. That's physically speaking, talking about war and time to heal. But spiritually speaking, there's a time to kill bad attitudes. There's a time to kill bad habits. There's a time to kill the animosity. And then he says, right after that, then there's a time to heal. Let it take place. It's not gonna heal overnight. Things are not gonna just voila and be back to where they were. There is a time to heal. After you say your I'm sorry and I apologize and you kill that part of it, there's a time of healing that needs to take place. And you cannot afford to rush the healing process. Let the healing go, because scars or wounds, they all need time to heal. No matter how much medication you placed on it, no matter how many Band-Aids or how much aspirin you take, there's always time to heal. And time will heal all wounds. Okay? There's a time to break down and there's a time to build up. There's a time to break down or humble yourself also, and it's a time to get some things in order because you have built something that has other things that should not be there. There's a time to break it down, and then there's a time to build it up the way you want it to be. As long as you have breath in your body, as long as you have time on your side, you can break down things and start all over again. I know a lot of times we don't like to start over on projects. We don't like to start over on different things that we've built. But according to the word, there's a time to break down certain things. Some things just does not need to be standing, and you need to go and break it down. and begin to build it up again. It's like when you was a kid and you start having these Legos and you build something and it's not turning out the way you would like it. What do? You come in, pretend like you're Godzilla, and you just destroy the whole thing, and then you take time to build it back up again the way you want it to be. Or if you're writing a letter or a poem or painting a masterpiece, sometimes you start out right and it just doesn't look like the way you want. Sometimes we just take it off, ball it up, throw it in the trash, and start all over again. And that is wisdom as well, when you need to start all over again when it comes to certain situations, because that is the time to break down. But he says also a time to build up. There's a time to weep. There's also a time to laugh. There's a time to cry. There's a time to get those emotions out. Obviously, when a loved one has gone on and passed on, there's a time to weep. But there's also a time to laugh. There's also a time to remember the good times. Your days should not be full of weeping all the time. Your days should not be full of sorrow every single time. There ought to be some times that there's, joy there. There's laughter there. The laughter needs to come back in the house for some of you. You've been sad for too long. This situation has gone on for too long as it is, and you need to bring the healing back. You need to bring the laughter back. You need to have your joy. Joy is not because something is good that's happening, but joy just depends on, the joy that's inside of you, that comes out of you. So sometimes you need to let that joy out of you, okay? He says that there is a time to mourn and there's a time to dance. And I was talking about that earlier, about, you have to make or think yourself happy sometimes. Sometimes you need to just, even though the situation hadn't changed, he says it's the time to dance. That doesn't mean that the situation has changed. Sometimes you have to dance in the middle of the nightmare. Sometimes you have to find the good out of any situation. Yes, there's a time of mourning, but the mourning does not have to last forever. In that mourning process, there's a time that you can still dance. There's a time when you can just kind of cast your care and, lay it on him, and you get up and you dance and go enjoy yourself. Watch a movie or go to a dinner or take yourself out. But you need to be able to find the balance, what he's trying to say, in between this. And especially when it comes to not knowing what to say in situations. You also need to find that balance, because you don't want to make things worse. Okay? Let's keep going. He says there's a time to cast away stones and there's a time to gather stones. Before, and especially in the Old Testament, they would collect stones as a memorial of what they have done, and this is what happened when we crossed this river, and this is what happened when this event happened, and so they would have these stones to remember them. But the Bible talks about there's a time to throw away some of those stones. Some of these stones have some bad memories with them, and you need to take the time to cast away stones. But also there's a time to gather stones, to remember the good things and remember how far God has brought you, or remember the good times when you prayed for that job and then it came through and how happy you were to get it, or when you married that person and how happy you were. There's a time to remember those stones. You need to gather those up again instead of saying all of them were bad. Everything is not bad as you think it is. So there's a time to gather the stones up again, okay? I feel like I'm really speaking to somebody. I don't know who it is, but this is a word for you when it comes to not only just not knowing what to say, but just recognizing the timings of what's going on in your personal life. So gather those stones up again. Go and search them out. Those stones are cast away, but you need to go and bring them back. He said there's a time to gather them, a time to embrace, and there's a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to hold on to something. There's a time to love on something, and then there's a time to let go. So if the child is going the wrong way and you raised them in the right way and you're embracing them and you're holding on to them, yes, there's a time to embrace them, but there's also a time to let them learn on their own. Sometimes you got to throw Jonah off the boat. You don't want to do it, but sometimes you have to throw them off the boat in order for you to have smooth sailing, because it's starting to bring you down now. Your health, your mental health is starting to go down. And so he says there's a time to embrace, but there's also a time to refrain from embracing. You can't always hold on to something or someone that long. Okay, you have to let things go and let them learn on their own so they can get wisdom. Okay, but don't let that hurt you from living your life. A time to gain, and there's a time to lose. There's a time for you going to have good seasons, bad seasons. There's a time for you to lose things. There's a time for other people to come in your life. There's going to be time. So the main thing, of course, about this is just recognizing those times. If you're in a season where it's a time to lose, just recognize that that season will change again, and there will be a time of gain. We always talk about how God was going to increase us and gain. Yes, that is true, but there are times where things are going to be taken out of your life. And yes, it's heartbreaking, and yes, it's one of those things that you don't want to go through, but it's part of the season. Okay? There's a time to tear, and there's a time to sow. And I said this one backwards, but that time to tear is basically you have to decide that I'm going to separate this. Jewish people in the Bible, whenever something was wrong, whenever something was heartbreaking, they would tear their clothes. Okay, but then he says that there's a time to sow. So when those times come, that's heartbreaking, and you have to tear some things apart, or some things apart being tore out of your life without you trying to make it tear. He says that the season will change, but there's a time to sow. And so there's going to be a sowing part where you have to stitch it right back together, because circumstances and situations of life will tear you apart from other things. But you have to make sure that if you're in a time of sowing or knitting it back together, take the time to sew things together. And I'm not a seamstress, but my mother taught me a little bit about how to sew. And one thing that I can realize is that it takes time to sew things in. It takes time, because be real patient. You got to put the needle the right way and pull the thread and tie it together. And something that's a rip that's maybe 2 inches long can sometimes take up to 30 minutes, depending on how well you stitch it back together. And for some of you right now, you need to take time to stitch things back together, because it has been this tremendous tear in your life, and you need to be like the people who inspect the wreckage of a plane. You need to put all those pieces back together and sew it together. A time to keep, and there's a time to throw away. There's, watch this, a time to keep silent, and there's a time to speak. And that's for some of you right here. There's going to be times that you have to recognize, like all these other examples that I just said, you have to recognize the season that it's time for me to address this. It's time for me to speak on this. But there's also a time for me to be silent. Especially in conversations, don't dominate the conversation. You talk when it's your time, and then you be silent when they're speaking, so that you can understand what's going on. That's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can do twice as much listening and not enough speaking. And so he says when it's a time to keep silent, but there's a time to speak. And you, being wise, have to discern those particular times, okay? A time to love, a time to hate. Then he says a time for war, and there's a time for peace. And sometimes our mouth can be the cause of war or peace or love or hate, all because of what we say and how we say it. You have to really look at yourself before you address a certain thing. Go to God and say and ask him to give you the right way to articulate the right things to say. My last scripture is in Psalms chapter 14. He says, "Let my prayer be set before you as incense." Okay? "The lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth." Put a watch before my mouth. Set a guard over my mouth, O Lord, to keep, he said, keep watch over the door of my lips. So here's David asking God to help me to say the right things at the right time, but set a guard over my mouth so that I won't say something that's going to be harmful. And then he says, keep watch over the door of my lips. Before the words come out, Lord, let them be seasoned with you. And I believe that's what we have to address and have to pray. when it comes to, I don't know what to say in this situation, take it before God. He will give you what to say. And he will give you the wisdom on how to say it right. But you have to do your part by discerning and recognizing the times to speak and the times to be silent. Okay? So I hope this broadcast helped you out a little bit. I want you to write me, let me know how these teachings have been a blessing to you. And I hope to see you on our next broadcast. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Upon the Rock broadcast. If this message has been a blessing, you can help us spread the gospel by sharing this message with your friends. Also, if you're online, please be sure to contact me, either through our website at shakirministries.org or through social media. I would love to hear from you. Together, we can build a godly foundation in the lives of people. Until next time, please know that I'm praying for you, and I hope to see you on our next broadcast.